thinking, off the top of your head, around that issue or that problem that you came here thinking about, that project or purpose. The question here in D8, the very last question, is reminiscent of what I'm going to ask you. The question is, what capabilities would the C community to address that issue need? Okay. So you've got some problem or issue. If you had a C community working in your organization or around it to work on that, what kind of capabilities would the people in that C community need to be successful?
I interrupt for a commercial. I'm supposed to announce to whatever's getting filmed here that this is session 3 of day 1.
Oh, yeah.
And Bonnie is going to start a discussion session going. The floor is yours.
Okay. Right. Questions about the question?
Could you use a student microphone?
Yeah.
Ha 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 ha.
Can I put it on the tape later?
Yes. What's your question?
Clarifying on capabilities. Is that capabilities as a skill set of the individuals or capabilities that these people are empowered to utilize?
It was certainly more than the skill set of the individual, because that would only be the human side. It would also be the tool side, and it was what they would need to be successful in augmenting or increasing the capability.
Let me introduce it.
Capabilities.
If you're talking about it, the groups have capabilities and organizations do too. So I think in a general sense, I mean, if there was a C community providing support to your Bs, what capability would that C community need to exercise as a community?
Okay. About 2.5 minutes per person. And not more than 2.5 minutes time limit.
I'll start talking.
Okay. Oh, you were going to talk about this.
Yeah, that's great. It's fun. So.
Do that now.
time. This is the whistle blowing. Yes, are you yawning? No, just stretching? All right. Comments? Who'd like to share something that they observed about a C community or capabilities in the process of that conversation? Peter.
Don and I were talking about trying to define their role a bit, and we felt that one of the fundamental things is that the folks in the C who see themselves as part of the C community need to feel that they're legitimate participants, that they have, and it's not just the issue of empowerment, that they feel a legitimate role, and it's perceived that way by people who perceive themselves as Bs or A, that's really rather fundamental, because before that, education and so forth really follow, but you feel that they're legitimate participants.
An essential part of the capability is legitimacy in the process, understood by everybody. Well, that's been, a major, major issue for me, is just having that distinction of a C and what your responsibilities are in the organization. Yes?
Relative to that, I mean, you envision the C people being necessary. Everybody's sharing this. Be as much more, but because I know when we get an order, 80% of right, we feel as oh, now you've got to do it. Look around and leave me alone, So unless the individuals are really involved in all aspects of the organization, I find it difficult to see it working another way. They can be leaders and recognized as motivators within that, but unless they have a allegiance, in a sense, to the rest of the orgs, it's tough to implement, I think.
Notice how for him the question of allegiance and a lack of communication comes up around if you're not in one organization or another, right? That's a paradigm. It's a paradigm we have.
The idea is understand that and accept that.
Okay. You want to speak to that point, Sid?
Just to speak to that point, at Los Alamos, we have just literally created a C-type organization. It's what we call a laboratory development group, and while I think say that it is not to invent then the top on people buy into the process because they would be the implementers. The C strong desire of the A and B people to do a lot better.
Bill?
Is there something happening now? Okay. My organization is clearly a C organization, but our function, as I see it, is to act as a facilitator, but what's going on around, and there has to be some conduit to all the answers. Yourself into the create everything.
B activity, C activity, and we have to be careful not to assume that you're assigned roles. And
Right.
you could put a C hat on or B hat on anytime, and it's to categorize those activities and find out where they are. And then C's job is to make B more effective. It's not to usurp anything about B or something like that. And it's very much related to what B's job is with respect to A, and the relationship of both sets, one's a customer and the other's server, whether it's A and B or B and C, there has to be trust and respect and both ways and roles that are clarified. So learning how to do that's part of the process ahead. But very definitely outsiders coming in to tell you what to do. When you get, as soon as you get the sense that they don't understand your job, it's half dead. So anyway, there's a lot of that that needs to be incorporated in this strategic process.
You want to take a question?
Sure.
Mark?
I was just going to say that although I usually sort of thought about the process of participation, but that someone's got to be accountable for some of those roles, making sure they go on. And so you have participation that's broadly shared, but accountability gets separated out by these sort of process levels.
That's a very, to learn how to make it more effective, and you have to start knowing where your resources go and budget it and getting it in control, not overdoing it. So very definitely those have to be, when you've got the B hat on, unless it's trivial little things that you do off and on, it should be a defined role, sure.
Another way of looking at it is to think of it in terms of organizational learning, and that very much is a process that has to be undertaken by everyone in the organization. And I see a role as far as the C process as being that those people, when they have on their hats, are helping others reflect, conceptualize, synthesize, retrieve and find others' resources. And I think that we need to think about it as something that ought to be embedded in the process with a lot of people. And that's not to confuse it as a model. But I think sometimes we think of the C people having to facilitate something rather specific. And I think there are a set of skills that we can practice in all situations that contribute to what the capability that we are trying to do.
This is kind of good. I think we better start churning along. We could throw away some of the sections of the binder, or have only 5 hypotheses instead of 6, and then we get done. So I'm sorry to push. Hey Mary, what the times for our wine and cheese this evening? It starts at 6, 5:30, yeah, and dinner is. Well, go find out and just tell me. But anyway, there is an hour and a half of sort of a reception. It's like out here, but we get a room where you don't sit down. Well, you can sit down, but it's not at the tables, so you can circulate and talk and argue about all these things. Oh, are you too bashful to tell me? What time's dinner? Yeah, so it's not in the same room yet. First, the reception is in one of the sort of more open bays in the right as you go in. We'll see. But anyway, it's like what I'd really like to see if some of you can start trying to cultivate the time talking among you. How would you design or plan for organizing a better B activity? And in that sense, you'd sort of have a C hat on, right? And then if you're saying, boy, you know, in order to do that C job well, there's a lot of stuff that I'd like to know and I'd like to be backed up with. Where do I get that knowledge in the backup? And what would I like to be provided with as far as knowledge goes and backed up in the way of tools for to do my job, as far as things that I could then get, oh good, now that's what I can start supporting the A's better, handling stuff. So let's go chugging through some more of these slides. So We were on D8, and we've had some discussion about that. So we're shifting now to start off with the rest of D. And incidentally, Eric, I decided to go back to this layout. So again, we look at something that we've met before in our discussions in D9, that the common things, they all must identify needs and opportunities. They all must design and deploy solutions, and they all must incorporate lessons learned. So this is, we're leading up to something important. Oops. Don't anybody leave the room, I lost something. So all of these factors are from which is going to emerge the idea of what Kodiak should be providing. So we've talked about the basic ABC model in D10, and now we talk about prevailing ABC practices a little bit, just to get oriented about that. So the first one in D11, there's no name in the English language for a C activity. At least I'm not aware of it. And it's something like there was no name for an augmentation system. So yet, you know, on reflection, you'd say these should be pretty important things. Why isn't there? Well, how do we get them recognized, give them a name, give them roles, get going? So that's why A, B, and C is sort of a silly set of things to offer, but there's a need for something like that. Just like augmentation system sounds a little silly. So we don't see many well-organized C activities, and it's not all that strange if it hasn't been clarified and identified and given a name. I don't know. Same way. It's an improvement program. Well, human resources do a lot of things like hiring and firing. So
yeah, but they're very, you know, there isn't a very good name, but they're often not cloaked, but let's say buried or subsumed into human resources development because people can't think of a specific name, and they don't see a way to put it into an organization either without threatening other parts of the organization.
Well, any restructuring threatens some other part, so yes. And information systems people are a big part of the change process too, not just the human resources, and together they'd make a good team. So anyway, you know, if there's sort of a relationship between B. See, B activity is not at peak performance. And the common sayings among the A's when they spot a B activity, now what? Or red alert, the B sighted off starboard bow or something. If the sense is that they're going to do unto you something, it's obviously not going to be very good. So why is that? Well, the A's could say, well, B doesn't appreciate our operational environment. And ask B, and he says A doesn't want to change. See? So anyway, those are just, they're easy to invent terms like this, but it's just trying to characterize the kind of thing that the working relationships have to be established to, like that. So any of the B capabilities warrant serious attention, and here's a list. See, assessing the needs and possibilities, surveying and evaluating options, selecting, integrating, testing and applying, identifying suitable pilot groups, running and evaluating the pilots, learning how much to introduce, how quickly, how to overcome cultural barriers, how to quickly incorporate lessons learned. So those are the kinds of basic challenges or attributes you think about that B is going to be facing. So in D14 we try to sort of characterize if our organization's out there and there are a lot of activities going on that are improving in different hunks of it. And you probably could go out there and go through your organization and find a lot of standing committees that have been working to improve this or that kind of thing. And the big aerospace, I remember 20 some of them I counted one time that were running committees across the whole corporation, a whole set of big operational activities that all sorts of things they were focusing on to improve. And then I'd see in different districts too, people assigned for, hey, you know, do something about this or that kind of problem, so that they were scattered all over. So you'd find resources being expended to improve capabilities in the A world. You'd find them all through the organization, and they're sort of different sizes, hit or miss. That's the common kind of thing. So if B activities aren't positioned for whole system augmentation, if they're not equipped for complex and rapid transfer, if they're scattered, ad hoc, loosely coordinated, if the results are unintegrated, incoherent, etc. So anyway, all this probably won't lead to a high-performance organization. So prevailing practices, you can point to a lot of sorry states around there. And this is just going. So the idea then is, if you're going to involve with your A, B, and C concepts in some strategic sense, what would you do? So anyway, this thing down here in D17 about saying, hey, if you started to get some coherent organizational support for the Bs, start to bring that in order, and that's sort of first stage in thinking about the kind of a role for C inside their organization. What kind of support do they need, and how do you get them together? And the thing we've seen before in D18, that this capability improve is a capability that's very important and should be brought up and given. So we're talking now about the kind of bootstrapping. So in D19 we said, all right, there are a couple of strategic issues in the ABC world. One is, how do you distribute your organization's resources appropriately between what goes on in A or B or C? So that's budgetary problems. And I guess through the years in the budgetary processes I've watched, that's been pretty hit or miss, and I don't know anybody that's budgeting for C. But once you decide how you're going to distribute, or in association with that, how do you say, how do I get the highest returns on the investments for those? And that's where strategy comes in. See, even if you don't have much to invest, or almost especially when you don't have much to invest, the appropriate strategy for how to use that seems extremely important in there, so that the strategy for how you're going to invest your B and C resources seems very important. So that investment criteria in D20 says, you know, if you're selecting capabilities for C to improve that serve A and C as well as B, that'll offer special investment leverage. So you start with those three basic capabilities you're trying to look at: how you can do group knowledge work, how you can transfer results up the line to respective customers. Well, A, B, and C all have that kind of issue. How you do your group knowledge work and how you transfer stuff up and back down, because your A work, it's a customer of B in a sense, and so on. So that, and then all three of them integrating information coming down the line from customers, as well as being able to transfer up. So those are the sort of generic things between 19 and 20. It's kind of how you work interactively with the customer's relationship in your life, and how you integrate your information. So then there's an important thing to look at that ABC model is in D21. So the upshot of what you're trying to do there is say, even though two organizations, their A activities may be widely different, their B activities aren't going to look so different, and their C's may look quite a bit alike between two organizations, see? So that's how you get in D22. You say, hey, the two A's might be very different. The B's aren't so bad, and the C's have a lot more in common. So this is a kind of observation that says, it really is a lot of potential in sharing the C work, because between different organizations it's very much the same. So that's what I would assume that you'd find if you found out what different mix of organizations are represented by the kind of B people that are here from that. And you get to thinking of what would your C support have to be like, and you really find out it's very, very similar. So this leads to 23. It says, well, look, the similarities among all the Cs, you know, different business, lines of business in your big corporation, different divisions or what, the similarity is something where you said it really could pool. So a lot of the C kind of things, you can pool resources to do it in common to support the Bs. Whether Org 1, Org 2, and Org 3 are different corporations or different divisions within a big one, or some mix of that. So this is how we sort of arrive at this idea of a C community, to make it sensible. See? So in D24 we're trying to say why you get a lot of return. Because the shared investment yields much richer C-type support to each participating organization at much less cost. And so also that leaves off more of your resources for going and applying them to B. So that makes sense. So this just leads to bootstrapping. Let's move down. Where the making C more effective and certain capabilities that you could pass on up the line that would make itself more capable too. Is that real sense? So very early we showed that feedback line. C's output, if fed back to support itself, would make itself better. So this is all leading up by some accident to verifying why the Kodiak seems so important. See? So anyway, this is sort of to summarize the A, B, and C. It's important to clarify those roles, those activities, and especially much to realize that if B is going to have to get more effective, you've got to get C into there and really invest in it. And then realizing that C's have a lot in common to make a C community within a big organization makes real sense. So then what do we do from there? We say, well, how many of you know what happens when you turn on your computer and wait for it to boot up? Doesn't everybody know? Yeah. So where does the word boot come from? It comes from Bootstrap. And why do they call it that? Well, they got some of this read-only memory that's burned in, and a limited amount of that sits there all the time, so when you turn on the computer, that's active. And the computer can be hardwired to start operating the program in there. So what that program do, it's just big enough and smart enough to reach into the hard disk and bring up and load more. That's now smarter enough to reach in and bring up more. That's now smart enough to bring up, and boom, you're underway. So you don't have to store all of that inside the computer. You have this Bootstrap kernel that will bring it. So reaches in to bring what's helpful to reach in and bring more. So what happens if you and your organization are looking out in that future and all those gorgeous capabilities that are going to be out there potentially to get, and you says, God, how am I going to load all those into my current operating world? Oh, you know what I ought to do first? I ought to reach out in the future and look for those capabilities to make mine now that are going to help me be all the better at reaching out the future and load more capabilities that are reaching out better. It's got a direct analogy to that. So you say, all right, that's another kind of way to looking at this and saying, and what capabilities would that be? Well, we've got some places on the map now out there in the future. There's the B capability and all the A things we want, and there's B and the C and the C community. And you look at it and says, boy, you know, it's sort of like, hey, there's some mysterious capability domain here. If I move in on that and capture it first and secure it, and then move over and take that up in the C domain, the C community, and that'll help me go up into the Bs, which consolidating those will help all of those even get more consolidated and better, and I'll be in a terrific position to start moving in on all the As. That's like a strategy for a military campaign. See? Instead of hammering away in a direct front like that, you say, let's take this strategy. So what's this first domain that looks like it's so much that would get so much leverage, where you put your landing craft in and go in on that? And that's what we're calling the Kodiak. So that's why we're turning to talk about Kodiak. It's a very common, prevailing, basic capability, and it has some potential for really improving it, so there's really a tactical approach you can make on it, and strategically, if you used it and deployed it after that, it would have strategic value for a campaign. So that's what we're going to do next. So let's go into section E. And so when you guys get out of this war college, you'll all be full colonels, and you can go back home and say, we've got the strategy, I want the troops. And then you know what will happen? So you'll run across tactical commanders who says, the hell with that, I like to take that mountain, and it's going to be part of the territory, so why can you argue? See? And by the way, I'm going to need all the resources to take that mountain. So that's just the kind of scenario you get in a war too. The strategist says we've got to take this island and then do this and this, and we can only use so many resources when we take this island, or the rest of the strategy is going to break down. Halfway through taking this island, the tactical guys say, God, we got it, we almost, just 5 more of this and 6 more of that, we can take it. And they radio back, and the guys say, sorry, that's your limit. You got all those goddamn things sitting back there in the port, you could bring them up. We got to reserve that for the next step. There's no, there's this tension that goes on in the fighting. And so really it's very important that the strategic people sort of get a chance to protect their strategy, etc., like that. So the tactical people can certainly win battles, but if they only use their tactical orientation, there's a lot less chance they can win a war like that. So this through the years had led me to be sort of interested about how do the military sort of keep and protect strategic things from the tactical ones. So they really have different ranks and different orientations about who gets involved with a strategic thing and how they shield that from the guys like Patton, General Patton, terrific tactical warrior, would go barreling through and outrun his logistics support because he just get all terrifically oriented about battling, see. So anyway. So in E2 we look at sort of the stages we're going through. Talk about the basic Kodiak model, then the knowledge domain interoperability, common Kodiak problems, strategic Kodiak augmentation, and conclusions. So we're going to march through that, and finally you'll get starting to see what's Kodiak anyway. All right, opening the package. So we had noticed earlier when we looked at this model here and said, what are the basic capabilities that they all three need to operate? They all need to do group knowledge work, transfer results up the line, and integrate information coming down the line. So all right. So we say the special strategic importance, and I've sort of talked to you about all of this, but heavy knowledge work is something that I've been using as a term, or knowledge-intensive activities, perhaps another one, but using that as a model to go after first for this Kodiak was very important in here. So you say, all right, I begin with some basics. There's some kind of organizational unit, some individuals working in this organizational unit in E5. So an organizational unit is one class of knowledge domain. You know, how many people says you've got a knowledge domain in that they're an organizational unit. There's some coherent sort of body of knowledge activity that goes along with that organizational unit. Well, you could have an individual, project team, a department, a functional unit, task force, committee, whole organization, community. What you're looking at is organizational units that could be of any of those size, and beyond the individual they sort of have the kind of activity. But even if they're an individual, you find that you have different knowledge domains. Your correspondence, your budgeting, your planning, your telephone lists, your tasks, various tasks like that. You belong to a couple of committees and you're working on. So each of these is sort of a knowledge domain. And when we draw these lines between them, we're going to be talking about the interaction that goes on between them and ultimately the interoperability that adequate interaction must lead to. So let's go to E6 and we start getting a picture for what we mean by Kodiak. So that organizational unit is busy up here interacting with the outside world. And it's very important for it to be interacting with it, but also scanning it for information and knowledge and ingesting knowledge to it that it ingests and digests and keeps within it, that it's usable. So every organizational unit has got to have that kind of capability to be effective at. And meantime, inside, doing analyzing, digesting, integrating, collaborating, developing, applying, reusing. And I've just taken for granted the business called learning is involved within all of this dynamic thing like this. So he says, all right, we're approaching now. To be able to do that well comes to close to what we're talking about here. And in E7, he says, all right, there's a basic knowledge process that results in dynamically evolving knowledge base. So the dynamically evolving knowledge base, I indicate here by, you've got intelligence collection, you've got a knowledge product that's evolving, and you've got dialogue records about the interaction between you and with other people. And together those things sort of comprise the general collection of the knowledge base that's dynamically evolving during the time you're interacting like this. So what's the capability built around this knowledge base and its development? So I call it the Kodiak, the concurrent development, integration, and application of knowledge. So developing an evolving knowledge base that integrates the concurrent contributions of many distributed participants, operating from the many nested knowledge domains involved within and among our enterprises, and concurrently supporting their application of the included knowledge. So that's quite a mouthful, but somehow that aggregate of activities is something you can approach and pursue with a sort of one coherent kind of tool and human system set of things. And it turns out to be very out. So incidentally, the definition and orientation about this, it's been evolving 30 years. The instances you watch in organizations and the redefinition and redescription and all of that, and the constant sort of continual reaffirmation of, my God, that's a very basic, very important capability. And piecemeal approach to parts of it aren't going to yield the benefits at all. So let's go on and look at what the piecemeal thing would sort of be leaning to. But first, we look at this picture again that we saw in the overview. He says, suppose you have a knowledge-intensive project going on, complex kind with a lot of people. And like we've shown before, it's interacting with the outside world, and it's building its intelligence collection inside that says, what do I need to have usable information, usable knowledge that I'm integrating from the outside world? What's my current state of my products? My knowledge products are evolving, and a whole bunch of them are current knowledge products of given activities going on in my group. So, and what's the dialogue? So let's just look at an example that as an evolving knowledge product, at any given time there are the proposals and plans and budgets that are set up at the outset, and some of them evolve. The legal contracts that we established, the milestones that we've set up. So those are all important current products that we're using to support our activity. We've generated those over the prior weeks or months, and they're the state of things now. The timelines, the design specs, product descriptions, manufacturing plans, test plans, results, field support manuals, open issues. These are all things that represent the current state. And then in the end, when this project goes away, some subsystem part of that is going to be brought out as this is the net project of our activity, net results, net product. So I looked at that and I said, I can envision in the future state that that knowledge at any given time is all online, and it's in a marvelous capability, marvelous state, so that individuals can bomb around in it, and they can stand there and shoot off things that says this ought to be improved or changed because of this and because of this and this intelligence we collected, and somebody else would come back right away and do this, and 2 hours later that product thing gets changed because of that. And the reasons for it pointing to this, and all of this is a growing record of evolving knowledge product, and a record of the dialogue about it, and the record of ingested knowledge that is important in the basis of that. So that's all going to be online, evolving, multimedia, hyperlink, bombing around, accessible by everybody in the project. So he said, geez, yeah, if that's going to be useful, that's inevitable. Okay, well, let's just look. That it was something of this model that I began on something less than 30 years ago. And the system we had running, and we've got some video footage of, we might show you Thursday if we get there in time. It shows, look, we were using multimedia, hyperlink structures and documents at that time. The orientation was to support this kind of thing. And in the early 70s, because we got on the ARPANET, we're going to support them and all, we had a lot more things built on that just can do this. The things we took out in the commercial world could support this kind of thing quite dramatically. And the pilot operations in big organization and in the aerospace projects just had people just drooling over, can't we have this for running our whole operations? And unfortunately, there wasn't any way to procure it at the time, the budgetary time like that. That this prototype system was fading in its attractiveness because it was becoming too expensive and slow. So anyway, we've got lots of sort of verification of system approaches and design that we're supporting things that those people who ran the pilots then still can't procure because there isn't anything that fits it. So why? Well, where do you find the user organizations that are defining this kind of a package of capability that's all coherent and interoperable that they need? The definition isn't right. I attended the last hypertext conference in December, I guess it was, and it was 2 years since the prior one, and I was really disappointed. Almost everybody there talking about their hypertext package was talking about some very limited sort of thing, as though what hypertext is for is to take some existing reference manual or dictionary or something, capsulate it on a CD-ROM so you can bomb around it and learn by it. Where does that thing fit in this picture? Well, that might be the way you import some of that external intelligence, but certainly that's not the way in which all the rest of this dynamically evolving stuff is going to be associated. So the requirements, starting to get it where that hyper stuff fits into this world, really are several stages beyond what's being addressed in there now. There was one paper talking about being able to mail a piece of hypertext and having the links be active through there. And people said, gee, how do people like it? Well, as a matter of fact, we just showed that it worked. Nobody really used it yet because it was really a hacked together thing. This was in one of the leading hypertext research kind of areas. And I sat there and says, God, we had that working in 1970. And that was a basic requirement. And it's still what I announce to people. That's a basic requirement. If you're going to build that kind of stuff to work into here, that's how you have to find your implementation scheme and the structure and the conventions you use. So, Ted, do you have something?
It seems like the first level question, in order to even be able to approach this, is at the top of the organization. People act have widely accessible and kind of by people saying one.
That's a continuing important thing. So we ran into that head on in the early 70s.
I'm sure you did in the defense establishment for sure.
Well, no, even in my laboratory. I was saying, what's the potential value of having a lot more open access? It seems on the surface of very high, but it's very clear that you run into social taboos and problems and constraints that aren't going to be resolved easily. So you say, look, let's make the system so it can do that, but let's also make it so there are necessary places where you've got to be able to have secure things. So let's build it so it's secure. Then we deal with that with the evolution of the social units that you call organizational units. Some of them are going to be able to be more open, move ahead, and you'll find out what really works better. But it would be disastrous just to assume that this means that everybody has equal access to every record, because there are personnel evaluations and things like that. You got to do that. And so the thing is to explore. But it's like well, there are a lot of things to talk about. If I describe the sort of system we built, and then by Thursday we can talk about a lot of the history and examples. But you can bring a system that will do this out in there, and it can blow the place apart. And that's part of what B has to learn how to do, is be smart about what kind of staging you do. But the lesson in here is, if you bring in the system that will only support the stages that you think you can do next year, then the next year you're severely constrained. So the idea is to really look ahead to say the kind of functional requirements and capability you're going to need in the end, and don't let yourself get blocked by solving immediate potentials in the range with systems that don't have that you haven't designed them so they would meet these long-term requirements. They're going to dead end. So exploring that terrain out there ahead to sort of guide about what those requirements are going to be is very important. So we have these 15 years or more out in the world with organizations with systems that would do this, really involved with a number of very large organizations, and it wasn't with the modern kind of technology and hardware, etc. like that, but it was out there learning a great deal that would be very valuable to integrate into succeeding stages, and learning enough to make pretty confident stabs at what the requirements are going to be in the future, and to try to tell people, look, if you're going to make new prototypes, boy, you really better listen about these requirements and build them.
Perhaps you're going to talk about this a little later, but as this evolves, it becomes apparent that if the collection of people that are working in this area is more than a few, the size of this handbook becomes impressive. A lot of it is fact, not conclusion or derived information. What is there some implied principle or some process that is used to distill it so that people can act on it rather than be inundated by it?
Sure. There are a lot of human system elements in there, skills and roles and methods and conventions, etc., need to be adopted, and a lot of utilities in the way of smarter tools to bring into it. And that there's a basic framework about architecture, etc., that seems called for. It provides the underlying capability, and then there's a lot to learn about how to manage that. But it's pretty clear that you'll have a lot more capability to manage complex knowledge with this kind of technology base than you would any other way. And so trying to learn how to manage it without that underneath it is sort of like trying to learn how to manage traffic with 20-mile-an-hour cars. So he says, well, no, we better go after it. And the things you mention are just among many very significant problems out there in the organization. And when I mentioned about the nanotechnology just obviously coming about, that I think that the accumulated output of any individual would be sort of a trivial thing to store, no matter how many terabytes or something that you got. A lot of that's coming, so our current worries about that are a little premature. And among the things that are ought to solve, how to control that so its size doesn't. Well, I can tell you some of the things that we did in the organizations, and what the policy that I established in our work was about what was saved and how, and what one of the big organizations did a different policy, and it was very interesting to see how the people who implemented actually did it. So we can talk about that. Maybe we wait till a little later. I'm not trying to brush it off, but I'm just saying, for instance, people talk about these, there's a neural net kind of super parallel computers that are very, very good at taking big bunches of information and just zooming through it and coming back with the 400 hits rated in probable relevancy to you that they found out among all that stuff. So there's some really powerful tools like that. And then the thing arises is, okay, then what do you do? So he's got. So there's another term that I didn't find. So what's a generic name for a knowledge product that's beyond you're writing a memo or somebody writing a book? It's a knowledge product of a year's work on a project. There isn't any generic name for that knowledge product, and it's important because that's the thing you're trying to support and facilitate as coherent whole. So for some reason, I started calling it an electronic handbook, the handbook someday way back, and I'm told that brings connotations that aren't good, etc. So I'm open for others. When people start learning more about what we're trying to describe here, it's open for new terms. Maybe we have to invent a brand new word. But like augmentation system and Kodiak, there aren't terms yet for it. Or C, what's the C? So anyway, so in E10 you find that, and so sort of handy. So if we start, as we're talking about it, their handbooks, in a way it's just saying, well look, a great deal of what C can give off to B is essentially a handbook, right? It says, hey, here are the guidelines for how you can do your work, the best thing we're integrating from external experiences we found. Here's a description of what seem to be the best set of products out there that you could start considering to installing in your work. Here's some of the experiences people have for installing them, some of the reviews from all that stuff. If you want it to, there are all the user guides for those things that are going to need to be part of your arsenal to put in there. So like that, right? So then here's a dialogue and argument that's been going on among people about, hey, how do you take care of certain kinds of cultural issues and paradigm problems that you've got? So a lot of stuff like, I'm sort of doing some of your homework for you because these are the sorts of things that you're supposed to generate by Thursday. But so in a sense it's saying, boy, it'd be really terrific if you could hand off this electronic handbook. So anyway, so there's another term in here when I call it an intelligence collection, this external intelligence. Does anyone know a better term? And there used to be people who were very sensitive about saying, my God, turn us all into the CIA. And you stop, it says, every organism and every organizational unit I know of absolutely has to keep track of what's going on in its external environment and somehow integrate that into its operative knowledge base. So give it a name. So it's got a name. I find that there's actually a business intelligence, organizational intelligence association or something like that was formed. And there's a professor in Sweden who's really been out for years talking about the absolute importance of good intelligence work for any functioning organization. And it's very interesting. So I stopped by the CIA 2 weeks ago. I was going to give a lecture to the nice Sanguine National Institutes of Standards and Technology. So I stopped on the way to talk to these other guys, because these are the analysts who have to handle and do a lot of intelligence collection digestion. They've been at it for many, many years. They've got a lot of good techniques, etc. Talking to them, why can't you bring some of your stuff out in the open, because we all need it? Well, the climate now, I think, would be better for it. But anyway, I think it's be very important to get those kinds of skills and experience into the world trying to do this. So, just looking and realizing.
Does that mean we shouldn't eat any of the olives in the market?
Yeah. I don't know. Remember many years ago when I was starting to find that they were trying to design a system. They were called SAFE for how they helped their intelligence analysts, and they looked at what we had, And the guy who was supposed to be a chief engineer said, my God, that's almost exactly what we need. So my people all started revolting. And so I had to tell some of the guys, the CIA people, well, sorry, I really wish we could, but I'd lose half of my staff, and it happens to be the troublesome half that does all the effective work. And he says, well, that's okay, I understand. He says, the spook side of our house really riles us up a lot too. And then he said, and the other day, so-and-so down the hall burned his draft card. What happened? Well, you know, same as any other group. So anyway, so those, I think there's a lot to gain by cooperation with them. Anyway, so the interoperability issue, if we just start jumping, because you guys, it turns out you're very slow listeners, and we're falling behind. And so if we look, we've seen something like E15 before, but here it's one individual. You say, look, I've got all these different knowledge domains. How interoperable are those? Who out there in the world has provided me with an ensemble of application tools that all work together so nicely that I've got the interoperability that I want? Well, it's going very slowly. And this dear old system, you've seen a little peek about us, mail's all integrated, and there's almost this spreadsheet thing, it was all homogeneous world. And I had to move out to the other worlds. It was a real shock to find out how, to what I'd been thinking about interoperability, it wasn't there yet. So that really means that in any of the different knowledge domains, something you've done is accessible by anything else in a very smooth way. And in our world, it means a link from one domain to another is operative at any time. Click on this, suddenly you're looking at this other information. But also, when you get there, what do you say? Oh, I'm looking at a given passage. What's the context? Oh, I have to be able to study around and move around and look. So what you have to be able to know how to do to move around in that and look can't be a totally different set of conventions from what it was where you jumped from. And then you say, well, also, I'd like to be able to jump to this kind of information, to jump over to what that guy made as a plan last week, to jump to somebody's email that said that. All these different things. So that's the kind of basic test about interoperability that I lay down to people, is I had to be able to jump on a link, or I had to be able to send you an email that cites some things. Boom. This is the way the requirements were. That was written 6 months ago by another team. This is the way the specs came out. Boom, right to one. Or you got to move around and look at all the specs to see what's relevant. But see, this is the current way the project guys are doing it, which doesn't seem consistent. How do you know? Well, look, there's a source code piece right down in there, and the kind of commentary on it you can read yourself. It doesn't live up to it. So all those different domains you've got to be able to bomb. So to be really interoperable, when you get there, you've got to be able to look around and see what you want. So that's the kind of test about interoperability that makes it basic. So you look at your own work in E15 and say, is that there now? Nope. Then you move to 16 and it says, even worse, if you're going to have to work with somebody else. So in 17 we talk about the term interoperability now is big business, big deal in the electronic world out there. The interop conventions just have thousands of people and such come to them for all the issues about the different protocols at the different levels and the different standards and interoperability is extreme issue, so that they can get the electronic interchange interoperability working appropriately. And nobody yet is talking about moving the interoperability on up the line like this for your knowledge bases and the linkage and the structures and the conventions for reading and viewing. But those are going to have to be brought into the world like that, see? So for humans, you've got to assume a similar process, interoperability, to avoid having information islands between human knowledge workers, see? So let's go to 18 and say, oh, but, you know, the groupware people are working on this already, right? So they've got these 4 different zones saying, hey, whether I'm working at the same place you are or a different place, or at the same time you are or at different times, I need to have this kind of working interoperability. Well, up until very recently, the research on that was all in specific zones in there. People doing meeting research in 1, or people doing conferencing and groupware and stuff in 4. So we were doing items in 1 in the late 60s. But by the time we got this picture of what essentially the Kodiak is and the kind of a hyper-document system you need, you realize that the solution you pick for 4 is going to have a big impact on the rest of it. That when you're doing meetings in 1, the records of that meeting are going to become the flow on what's just part of the flow of records in the system that supports different time, different place. And you realize that in that meeting too, if you're really online with a meeting, you ought to be able to go to anything that's been happening prior about there to bring up and show and talk about inside this meeting. So that's why we sort of put that aside, important, but boy, you've got to get the other one signed up first. And then say, all right, this 1, 2, 3, 4 isn't that clean in E19, that you have all sorts of half meetings and odd times with people and all sorts of other things. The domains are all scrambled. So this is a nice image. It's 1, 2, 3, 4, and it's good to help thinking, but the scramble part of it. So in E20 we really bring out a difference. We say, you know, in the old paper-based operations, where what carried the interoperability was my passing paper to you. And we shared all the conventions about how you make pages and footnotes and dates on it and titles and abstracts and things like that. All those conventions are shared. If they're shared, then we can be interoperable. So WYSIWYG and desktop publishing helped all that. So what happens though when we extend to this online world? So we're doing more and more of our work online and jumping around, and this is just a very different challenge. So this is something that just, you know, it's a different paradigm. It's again an example of a paradigm. That, you know, when people, what we did through those years since about 1970, a great deal of living online and working with people remotely and building up all these records. We found out there are a lot of things yet to learn and resolve, but it really makes a different way of living. And sometimes there'd be people who were very highly qualified computer systems people come to work for us, and we'd be running into friction problems for maybe a year with them, because they'd get acquainted with some part of it and then they start wanting to promote some kind of improvement to that part which would be inconsistent with the larger. And the experience base that they had just registered with them. There's some unconscious field you have as a professional in a given area. If you come up to a group of people or are going to move in and work with them for a while, that depending on the given topic, you've got some instinct that says within a certain number of hours, days, or weeks, or months, or something, I should have grasped what they're doing and be treated as a full participating member in the discussion. See, no patronizing buddies saying, well, wait till you understand it all. So you've got an instinctive feeling from your experience. But if you move into an area that surprises you because it's operative in a paradigm that you don't really grok yet, you're likely to start saying within a certain period of time, well, God, you know, why aren't they listening to me? And then you'll start feeling like there's something wrong, they don't like you or something. And then you go knock on your boss's door and come in and sit down, and I say, well, this is what would happen periodically. And I'd say, how come they don't like you? He says, I've never been any place they didn't like me before. And it turned out almost the same thing. It's what you understand the dynamics are. The guys have been around there for a while. They hear these questions. They don't want to get into an argument with the guy, because if you get polarized, then it's very hard later to undo that when the perception goes like that. So they'd sort of just slide around it. They wouldn't respond or something. Yeah, well, that might be a good idea or something, but they'd never really meet him head on because they knew that the dialogue would get snarled, because it's very hard to tell him there's another domain over there that when you put them together, says no, don't go, you can't move your changes into that direction. You have to stay over here. Yeah, but that's not as efficient. I know, but you know, it's a trade-off between what you got to do and these other things. I don't believe it. You guys are putting me off. So then, it would usually be something in the order of 11 months or something like that, working in that laboratory intensively before those would start to untangle. So this is a real problem for me out there still in there like that, is to get the people who've done a lot of work with computers, support a lot of people with it, know all the common modern products and stuff like that, and it's very hard to sit here and say, well, you'd be surprised if you lived in this different environment. And it's sort of like if you're a sailboat owner and you've done a lot of sailing and you come back and almost everybody else is a powerboat guy, and they never live in a sailboat, but their ideas of what they do in a sailboat are something you say, well, I don't think that'd work. Well, why not? I've been boating all my life. See? I know, but it's a very different world, having a sailboat. So anyway, and this can get overdone, so the people in the sailboat area can use it as protection and stop listening to ideas. But anyway, it's a paradigm issue again. So that the only way out of it is to say, we have to set up pilot exploratory operations with enough people in each one that gets seasoned and shaken down in that area so we can start evaluating. And the evaluation is done by people that are seasoned, experienced users in real life using these kind of things. Or we go sailing right by places that are just very rich in potential because they didn't really seem to fit the scheme. Well, if we think about the Kodiak, we'll talk about the physical systems tomorrow. Let's move to like E27 in one big jump. Or wait a minute, let's go to E25. So a typical manufacturing operation, we looked at that kind of a figure before. So we say, if among all these functional activities we need to have the interoperability we're talking about, this is going to be a sort of an unprecedented strain. And really, when we go into detail in this, you begin to realize what's involved in that. So then you say, well, you make a picture of your organization and you'd have the same issues. So here's a kind of a challenge that we met in the aerospace world. You know, that one organization represented by, say, 2,000 to 3,000 people in this little circle on the top in the E27. So those are the people working on a big program within the organization. And they're scattered among the kind of functional units that we described in the earlier diagram. And they need their interoperability between them in order to be effective. And then you look at what's the larger thing that really puts together that airplane. That you've got at least the first tier of suppliers are very actively involved in the design of the whole thing. They've got to come up with a design for the landing equipment and the radar and stuff that fits in, and a lot of interaction goes on, a lot of contractual relationships and exchanges. So he says, boy, if they couldn't be in the same highly competent Kodiak domain, you're losing a lot. What about their suppliers and on down? So I was really absolutely dumbfounded at the number of supplier organizations that are in this tree like that. They said, okay, like 6,000 in this complex airplane. A big transport would have like 13,000. 13,000 organizations with which you have to have a lot of ongoing close relationships to even get them organized enough to be ready to put together the whole thing, much less all the stuff about if any design changes came along and readjusting all through there. So we'd say to people who had worked with our kind of support system and say, what would be the value if that were available throughout this whole industrial segment doing this? And their imagination would picture all of the changes that would come about, and they'd overflow pretty soon. And I'd say, well, hundreds of millions of dollars a year value? Oh, easily. You're measuring snafus avoided, shortened cycle times, better quality, all the different aspects of it. So anyway, so some of the people in there are booking for this now, but it's still against the tide. But what happens when the Air Force says, by God, we're not going to have sole source anymore, we have teaming. Two of you got to be together in the design and be able to manufacture this thing. So you look at E29, and that's just what's been going on the last few years. But really, those are just a special, complex case of saying the interoperability you'd need if you got really advanced Kodiak going is just mind-boggling in that. And yet someday, the industries or the countries that provide that are going to be just way, way ahead. So you realize if you innocently started with looking at augmentation systems and Kodiak and all of this, you realize that leads to a problem. So where do you find an emergent segment of our society that's beginning to look coherently at this and say, this is what we need? So it's like saying, well, maybe you don't want to tackle that big a one, but just another argument for why the C community kind of thing is so critical, because there are very important issues in standards, etc., and in cooperation with vendors that have to be resolved and developed if even your own whole corporation is going to get supported. And we talk about the expense, E31. So what if you said, what if I choose B instead, or A in here? These A, B, and C are just, they're not our A, B, and C organizational improvement models. What do I improve different stages of interoperability? So some will be cheaper than others. So that that ends up falling apart pretty well.
What ends up falling apart?
That if you say, look, I'll only go for partial interoperability, then you start saying, you look downstream and the organizations that have a complete, you never know what kind of shift in the organizational dynamics are going to go on where some link, you said I don't have to have interoperability. See, well, if this one isn't interoperable with this, how interoperable is this going to be with some other one that this is interoperable with? And you just can't sort of come out with some plan that makes sense. And
you're saying it's either all or nothing.
At the stage of understanding of all this that I'm in now, it looks to me like the partial interoperability isn't worth serious consideration right now, because what's the argument for it? And it may in the end some clever way to do that and save more money than you lost an opportunity, but I don't see it. Excuse me?
We already have partial
yeah, we don't have to go to the future for that. Huh? Yeah. So,
but isn't the argument about partial interoperability, and I don't mean, I don't, isn't the argument of partial interoperability is that that's the way things actually happen? And I'm not saying, you know, I'm saying that, I guess I don't, a lot of the concepts here make a lot of sense, but I don't see a process that results in any kind of coherent way of implementing it.
Yeah, we haven't gotten into that yet. See, wait till Thursday when everyone's supposed to describe how they would design a C community. No, I guess it's part of if you, let's see, if you're not understanding what it would take to make it complete, and you're not exploring what kind of value that would give in extra value over different stages of partial ones, then I think you haven't faced the whole general issue. And that's the base I come from, is saying, I don't think it would be right to, right now, stop talking about what it would take to get maximum interoperability. And nor exploring, say, taking groups of people, and because they don't have to interoperate with the whole world at the outset of pilot operations, just start getting calibrated for what kind of real cooperative, integrated, highly coordinated, zooming knowledge work that they're capable of doing you almost have to do that before you can start judging the relative loss in performance and value that you get if you had islands out there, interoperable islands. So it's sort of from that sense of, it doesn't make sense to me now to give serious consideration to accepting, you know, and not starting to move.
Isn't the reality that this couldn't happen instantaneously? So you're going to have an implementation strategy.
You bet.
And so you're going to start working on some hierarchy of nodes where you're going to connect information, and your long-range goal is to have everything connected. But time's marching on, your horizon keeps moving, business keeps moving, and so from a practical standpoint, you may never get there.
Right.
Because and when you think you're there, then something else happens. So you just, so your vision is the input vision from a practical standpoint. So you're going to evolve.
No, I'm not an endpoint. Oh. Let's see. In the strategic thing I'm trying to get established is a process by which you sort of maximize the efficiency with which you climb a hill. And what you're going to find is the best path up there depends upon that process working. Okay, whether it decides sometime that total interoperability is not feasible or not, I don't want to prejudge. I'm just saying right now I don't see giving up on that as being a very serious factor in planning to go ahead. And practically speaking, what you have to do is say, well, look, one of the things, if you're going to explore that world out there, you can't do it with products, because they're only going to move out far enough to where the profitability stops. So how are you going to get prototype support systems to make pilots out there that start getting outposts that really explore that? And that's the kind of thing that I say some of those outposts out there are saying, hey, let's go out and set something up and where we've got a very high degree of interoperability of the kind of knowledge work we're talking about among a substantial set of close workers, and really get calibrated on what that provides. If you don't know, there'll be a whole area out there that instinctively is very, very rich, and that's a very high degree of interoperability and capability. You say, well, if I at the outset am assuming I'm never going to be able to get in that area, that's what I'm saying. I don't think it would be, you would be doing justice to the potential to not try to find a way to reach that domain.
By a high level of interoperability, are you referring to all the members of the team being able to have access to the same information?
And a little louder.
By a high level of interoperability, do you mean all the members of the same team being able to have access to the same information and contribute to that information base? Are there other aspects to it?
It's sort of that's basic definition. Then what picture one has in his mind about what does that mean? I mean, a wide variety. Because there are people who say, I already have that. I can cut and paste. I'm saying, well, no, that's not quite what we're talking about. I mean, I'm talking about something a little bit more than that. And so it's something that hasn't been explored. It's to really pursue that, and it's you know, very important. So tomorrow we'll finish up on the Kodiak, and you're really supposed to, I mean, maybe that'll be the end of the project if we don't get the fillers for the rest of it. But my support people have been very good in the past. So we go on talking then about the kind of support system we're bringing in, and I think those issues of what you'd settle for, what you can go after, the practical parts of those will get a little bit clearer when we talk about the kind of implementations we've been talking about. Let me just say we've established in the past the practice of inviting guests, etc., to come and share our wine and cheese and discussion with us. So one that's walked in is Jim Mulvaney in the past here, who works also at EPRI, as does George Touchton. And Jim is an alumnus, is what we'd say, or a graduate from a year plus ago. Yeah, and I met him 2 years ago at least. 2 years. Yeah, and so anyway, and Thursday afternoon, he and Margaret and Bonnie are going to take a few minutes to tell everybody about what they're starting to organize as a local interest group. They call it the Bootstrap Forum, and talking about it as a sort of a model for if people want to start cultivating some activity around in their own domain. So he'll be with us this evening. And Mike Ward from Hewlett-Packard is supposed to meet us too. He came through just a year ago, and Mike is in the corporate quality program in charge of software quality. So he got quite enthusiastic about all this, but hasn't been able to kind of connect that with other people at Hewlett-Packard. We've gotten several. I can't remember offhand if there are others. But anyway, if you see a stranger, walk up and get introduced tonight, and then find out whether it's an A, B, or C. And if he doesn't even know what you're talking about, he doesn't belong there. See, you see, and he says, "No, I'm just the waiter," or something. Are there? Let's see. I feel like there's sort of an unresolved point that George raised about how idealistic to pursue all of this. So talk it out later. Are there other questions that you might have for a few minutes? Right, George, can we revisit that question? Let's just see what I left making you feel uneasy.
Well, I guess I don't know. Maybe it's because my hair is a bit grayer than it used to be. But I've just come to the conclusion that you can't. You never make anything from whole cloth. You better start.
Never make anything what?
You can't make anything from whole, and you better start from where you are. And I don't see any implementation strategy working. Begin in the world, and that a world that does have scale this and that. And I mean organizationally, islands knowledge-wise, islands technology-wise. That's the world that we're in. And the goal of going to complete interoperability is something I'm preaching, but I don't. And on the horizon point to look at. But I don't see how it can serve you as a useful tactic for getting on the road.
Well, let me just ask you if you get.
I mean, and to come back to your analogy, yes, Patton had his problem. But imagine without Patton and without somebody else.
The combination.
But his secretary to fiddle with. I mean, we would have lost the war in very short order.
No, wait. It's what point I was trying to make is how would the tactical guys do without the strategist? I wasn't saying that you could do only things with strategy at all, but there's a different frame of reference, and if you don't have a strategist, how do you think the war is going to go? See, that's the point I'm trying to make, is where's the role for strategy in this organizational improvement? And along with that comes the issues like what you were talking about, is saying, sure, it's likely to be impossible, but you realize they do resolve the interoperability in traffic in all sorts of ways because the economic need is really there. And those organizations that have had choices in the past and haven't looked ahead and took a path that's going to leave them when the standards get set in an isolated way, we'll have a real penalty to pay. So it's just a factor that needs to be kept in the strategy, is all I say. And you don't want to keep a factor in the strategy that's obviously impractical, about saying, I'm not going to go ahead with this war until I'm sure I can win, or something. That isn't what I'm trying to say at all. And it's just that this interoperability, no matter where you draw the circle, is going to be a very challenging problem. And it's the kind of thing that just really extra justifies the value of cooperating in a C community, because you get more chance to make less island problems. So that's that sort of sense, and I got more gray hairs than you do. that you watch a lot of.
There are some other relevant military. For example, Hitler's invasion of Russia was a tactical enterprise, strongly condemned by General Staff, who were strategists. And they told them that he would lose the war if he invaded Russia. He lost the war. For a lot of reasons, but the front war killed him. And again, to pick up on that same theme, I think one could at least advance the hypothesis that the Gulf War was probably one of the best examples of a combined strategic tactical approach where all of the forces and the knowledge were better coordinated than they had been in earlier times, and for probably a lot of reasons it worked out very well.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. So anyway, tomorrow's another day, so we'll see you in half an hour at for wine and cheese. And what I'd really appreciate during that time is if you cycle by and sort of give me some clues about, hey, what you need, the questions you have, etc. And I still got to do some prepping for tomorrow, so I may have to leave before I get too much of it. But anyway, we'll see you then. Thank you very much for the day.